man named Manel was going about his day as usual when he noticed ambulances were everywhere. When he arrived at the supermarket, people were frantically grabbing supplies, like something terrible was about to happen. Manel felt uneasy, but he brushed it off, bought a small stash of food for a few days, and went back home. That evening, his sister Belen, who worked for the government, contacted him and warned Manel that a mysterious, rabies-like virus had begun to spread worldwide, causing those infected to become uncontrollably aggressive. The government had already prepared a secure evacuation zone on one of the nearby islands. She urged him to meet her there so they could evacuate together. Manel immediately booked a flight, but just as he was about to board, the airport systems failed, and all flights were suddenly cancelled. Everyone's phones buzzed at once with an emergency alert. Martial law had been declared. The borders were sealed, and no one was allowed to leave or enter the country. Manel quickly called Belen, desperate for guidance. She told him to head back home and wait for someone to pick him up. But when he returned to the city, he found it already in lockdown. Streets were barricaded, and people were running everywhere in panic. Manel had no choice but to abandon his car and continue on foot. But by the time he got there, soldiers were surrounding his neighbor's house. The neighbor had been restrained, handcuffed, and looked like he was mutating. The next day, Belen contacted him again. Her neighborhood had also been locked down, and the government was about to evacuate people into a quarantine zone. But she warned that the quarantine zone was even more dangerous than staying put. She begged Manel to avoid the soldiers, wait for the area to be cleared out, and then come back to find her. Knowing help could take a long time to arrive, Manel rushed to the supermarket to gather more supplies. But the shelves were empty, completely looted. He managed to scavenge a few scattered items from the floor, but as he gathered what little he could, a police officer ran toward him, bleeding heavily from his arm. He entered the store and quickly locked the doors. Moments later, screaming people ran by, and another officer was attacked by a zombie. Manel rushed to help, but the zombie lunged at him. Before it reached him, the officer shot the zombie just in time. The injured officer began mutating, and his partner warned Manel to stay away before taking his own life. Manel rushed home and barricaded himself inside, nailing the windows shut and drawing the curtains. The military soon began a forced evacuation. Soldiers knocked on his door, but Manel hid silently in a corner to avoid detection until they left. 2 weeks passed. The once bustling city had become a silent wasteland. Cell signals were gone, and he couldn't contact Belen. As his food supplies dwindled, he was forced to venture outside, armed with only a fishing spear, to search nearby houses. He broke into several houses, but found nothing. Then unexpectedly, he found an old woman who had also missed the evacuation due to her frail legs. From her window, she had observed which homes had stocked supplies. Manel managed to gather more supplies with her guidance, and even found a working motorcycle in one of the garages, which extended his reach and allowed him to find more supplies. Together, they survived for a while, but soon, the entire neighborhood was picked clean, and once again, they ran out of food. One night, the old woman contacted Manel over a walkie-talkie. She had been listening to the radio and heard about a new survivor base being formed for those who missed the evacuation. Determined to protect her, Manel promised he wouldn't leave her behind. But the next morning, when he came to get her, he discovered the old woman had taken her own life, not wanting to burden Manel any longer. Heartbroken, Manel set off alone toward the base mentioned in the broadcast. But when he arrived, the place had already been overrun. As soon as he pulled up, the sound of his motorcycle drew a horde of nearby zombies. He sped off, dodging them as best he could, but he suddenly crashed into a pile of corpses. He scrambled to his feet and tried to restart his bike, but it was dead. With no choice, he fled on foot as the infected closed in. After a desperate run, Manel managed to barricade himself behind a fence at a pier. But there were no boats in sight. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, he spotted a small motorboat floating a short distance away. He swam to it, climbed aboard, and managed to escape. But the boat eventually ran out of fuel, leaving him stranded once again, until he spotted a freighter approaching from a distance. The crew rescued him, but the language barrier made him uneasy. Fortunately, one crew member, Prichenko, spoke Manel's language. When Manel overheard they were planning to go ashore for supplies and to repair the ship, he offered his help, saying he is a local and even knows the way to a safe zone. But the captain wasn't convinced, as he had seen too many so-called safe zones that turned out to be death traps. He then asked Manel what he did before the outbreak. Manel answered that he was a lawyer. Prichenko quickly said something to the captain, who walked away without another word. Later, Manel discovered that Prichenko had lied and told the captain that Manel was an engineer, because in this new world, the law had no value. Later that night, Manel heard screams from outside. Apparently, the crew had found more survivors. But by morning, none of them were around. When Manel confronted Prichenko, he coldly replied to mind his own business. That was the moment when Manel realized this ship wasn't as safe as he had hoped. Manel then told Prichenko about a hospital he knew, one that had a helicopter they could use to fly to the safe zone together. But Prichenko hesitated and ultimately refused. Manel knew he couldn't wait anymore. That night, he sneaked into the crew's lounge, intending to steal the motorboat keys and escape. But he froze as one of the survivors from the previous night was tied up in the room. Manel rushed over to untie him, but as soon as the man made a run for it, he was gunned down instantly. The commotion brought the crew rushing in, along with Prichenko. In a sudden twist, Prichenko turned on the others and killed all the guards. Prichenko had changed his mind and helped Manel to prepare the boat, but just as they were about to escape, they were spotted, and the other survivors were shot immediately. Prichenko managed to take cover, but he was wounded in the shoulder. Still, the two of them escaped and made it to the shore. They drove to the hospital, hoping for the helicopter, but the helipad was empty. As they tried to figure out their next move, a zombie suddenly lunged at them. Manel hit the brakes hard, jumped out with his gun, and shot the creature dead. More infected came, but he fought them off until he ran out of bullets. Still, they made it into the hospital. But Prichenko's condition was worsening, and Manel started looking for surgical equipment. Suddenly, a sound came from the air vents. Manel leaned in and listened and then shouted for help. But this attracted a nearby zombie. Manel managed to kill it, but the sound brought more. He ran downstairs and circled back to the operating room, but Prichenko was gone. Suddenly, a woman opened another door and told Manel to follow her. She led him to a group of survivors hiding in a secure stairwell. They had already operated on Prichenko and saved his life. Even better, the helicopter was real and was parked in the backyard. However, the path to it was through an area crawling with zombies. As they considered whether to take the risk, gunfire echoed from below. The gangs from the freighter had arrived, searching for supplies. There was no more time for hesitation, and they had to fight. Manel quickly improvised a plan. He spotted some fences and tied them together, forming a ring around the group so they could move and defend themselves at the same time. It worked for a while. But then, more infected started jumping into the circle. The group was forced to fight while advancing inch by inch. They finally reached the hangar where the helicopter was kept. Manel broke the lock while others used the fence to block the entrance. Everyone rushed inside, slamming the gate shut behind them. But some infected still got through. Manel stayed behind, fending them off to buy time. Then, just as they were preparing for takeoff, the thugs arrived, armed and shouting for them to stop. Refusing to surrender, Manel broke open the gate and released a flood of infected onto the thugs. Prichenko, already in the air, dropped a rope ladder. At the last moment, Manel grabbed it and climbed up, escaping the madness below. As they flew away, cell phone reception returned. Manel finally gets in touch with Balin and shares the good news. They've secured a helicopter and are heading toward the safe zone. But Balin immediately warns him not to come, as the virus has already reached the islands. Shocked and heartbroken, they realized that there's nowhere left to run. Their only hope now is to find a remote, uninhabited island that the virus hasn't touched yet.